What's up, everybody? Tom Pelissero here with Judd Zulgad across the street from Vikings headquarters on Friday. A little more than 48 hours to kick off between the Vikings and Bears at Soldier Field. And Judd, this game is interesting because you have two teams. They're both struggling to throw the football. They both have some age on defense. They both have some injuries that are holding them back at certain positions. But they're also two teams that really already 5 weeks into the season have their playoff hopes, I don't want to say on life support for the Bears, but pretty close for the Vikings, obviously.
Yeah, and the Bears appear to be really struggling with who they are. Mike Martz is trying to run an offense that I think at this point last year we didn't know if it would work, and it eventually did. And this year I think the feeling is it's not going to work.
Right.
He's trying to force Jay Cutler into an offense that just doesn't have the personnel around Cutler to be successful. Doesn't mean that Cutler couldn't be a good quarterback in the right system, but this clearly doesn't look like the right system. The funny thing is, as bad as the Vikings were early in the season, starting 0-4, you look at it now, and really the Bears are in more disarray because so much more was expected of them. They went to the championship game. The Bears are starting to remind me of the 2010 Vikings, a team coming off a season where, now granted the Bears weren't as good as those Vikings were, but
right.
A team coming off a very good season. They got on a roll, went to the title game, and now things are starting to come undone, and so you have more controversy actually surrounding them than you do the Vikings.
The biggest difference, I think, between those is that the Bears don't have the firepower on the perimeter that Vikings team did when you had Sidney Rice. Obviously, Sidney Rice was hurt last year, but you had him, and you had Harbin, and you had Shanko, and you had Peterson, you had dynamic playmakers. Tell me who's the leading receiver for the Chicago Bears right now.
Yeah, I can't even tell you that.
It is Dane Sanzenbacher. An undrafted rookie is the leading, not including Matt Forte, the halfback, who's got like 30 catches. Sanzenbacher has 16, and he leads the receivers. That's unbelievable.
Well, and the problem there, too, though, is the expectations for the Bears were so much greater going into this season because of what they did. But if you really look at the whole gamut of last season, some of these warning signs were there already. But I think there is much more of a chance that things are going to go south there. I think with the Vikings, there's no real expectations. With Chicago, there was, and those appear to be unraveling.
So now Donovan McNabb goes out and plays at Soldier Field. We don't know what the conditions will be, but we know how the wind can swirl in there. It's cold. I mean, it's cold here. I assume it's going to be cold down in Chicago as well. And if you get any sort of wind into the stadium, it's going to be a little bit different environment than what the Vikings have played in San Diego and in Kansas City. I'm interested to see how this Vikings team responds, because let's go back to a year ago, and you had the Vikings come back in overtime to beat the Arizona Cardinals at home.
Right.
And that was the win that people said, oh, that's the one that should be kind of propelling them forward. Yet there's this sort of negativity around it. Last year, it was about Brad Childress, and the fact that none of the players would say they won for Brad Childress. This year, it's Donovan McNabb, who got booed like no quarterback has ever been booed when you're winning a game by 24 points, probably. You have this sort of underlying thing. Last year, they went to Soldier Field. They played poorly. They lost the game. Then they came home and got wiped by the Packers. This year, if they go down and they lose at Chicago, I think they're going to come home and get wiped by the Packers again.
I'm picking the Bears in this game. The Bears are favored by 3 points, which is essentially the home field advantage.
Right.
That being said, I do think it's an interesting game for the Vikings because you could almost take Donovan McNabb out of the equation for this game. This game could be won. If the Vikings win it, it's going to be won by Adrian Peterson and that defense.
What did Donovan McNabb do in the last game? He completed 10 passes.
And when you're playing on this field in these conditions, we already know that even if the weather's good in Chicago and it's supposed to rain during the day on Sunday, even if the weather's good, it's a terrible field.
Right.
That field is always in bad shape. So really, how you're going to win this game offensively through Peterson, a steady dose of Peterson, and that defense. So the Vikings certainly have a chance. Arizona's so bad, Tom, and I mean they're awful. And so from what I saw of them, I can't pick a Viking victory based on success against a terrible team.
No, and Jay Cutler versus Kevin Cobb in terms of their skill sets is wildly different. Now, the biggest mismatch in this game is going to be the Vikings' ends against the offensive tackles of the Chicago Bears, because they are struggling. Jamarcus Webb at left tackle. They have had a revolving door at right tackle because Gabe Peremy, the first-round pick, has been sidelined. You like that matchup from the Vikings' perspective, but I also know what Jay Cutler is, and for as much flack as Jay Cutler gets, he has an elite arm. He can keep plays alive with his feet, getting outside the pocket. He can make a lot of things happen, which isn't what Mike Martz wants him to do. But point being, he's capable of doing a lot of things. People talk about the beating that he took in that Detroit game. I think he completed like 75% of his passes. He actually has been complimented for the way that he played in that game by basically everybody who watched it. His offensive line has let him down. Now the question becomes, Martz has a couple of options here. He can continue to bang his head against the wall trying to run a scheme that's not working right now. He can bunker down with a bunch of protection and still try to run the offense, which puts fewer people in pattern. Or you can make some adjustments and let Cutler have a little bit more freedom. And I wouldn't be surprised if number 3 is the way they go.
And it sounds like from what happened this week in Chicago, Cutler must have gone to Martz and said, "You got to help me out here. You're getting me killed." That Detroit game, if you watch Cutler in that game, any question about how tough he is pretty much has been erased because he kept getting hit and he was always on the run. So you can't compare him to Cobb. Cobb was just terrible. Cobb was a terrible quarterback. I don't know if he's going to be that bad for the rest of his career, but when you look at what
Cutler... He will never be a Pro Bowl caliber star.
When you look at what Cutler can do in this game, Cutler has the ability to get away from Jared Allen, Brian Robinson. He can do some things. If they get him any protection at all, they could be in decent shape. And remember, the other thing to keep in mind is Matt Forte and what he could mean in this game in the run game. This is not the Kevin Williams, Pat Williams, you can't run against the Vikings defense. So it's not going to shock me at all if the Bears come out, once again, on a bad field and try to establish their run. And it's also not going to shock me if they have a bit of success doing it.
They've got to get the ball to Forte. They've got to find a way to get the ball to Johnny Knox, who only has like 14 catches this season.
But it can be done.
It can be done, and that's why I really don't know what to expect. Honestly, I've thought that there were a bunch of games over the past month here for the Vikings that have really been coin flips in my mind, where it seemed like they were catching Tampa and they could beat that team at home. I thought that Detroit, that maybe that would be the game based on all the circumstances and everything else. They'd win that game. They obviously crumbled and they fall apart. The Kansas City game, again, I thought they'd find a way to beat a beat-up team. And then last week I figured they're going to pack it in. Arizona's got more to play for, and they wiped the floor with Arizona. But the value of turnovers and the value of a fast start, I don't think can be underrated, because there was no chance once the Cardinals got down the way they did in the first quarter that they were going to come back.
I need to see one more game from the Vikings and one more victory before I pick them. I just need to see one,
right,
because Arizona wasn't good enough for me to put enough stock in that victory to say this team has learned a lesson or turned it around. Fact of the matter was, against Arizona, they got up huge at halftime, and it was almost this time impossible to blow that lead. McNabb, to me, wasn't very good. I don't expect him to be good on Sunday in Chicago. However, I would not be surprised, like I said, if they come out with a game plan of Peterson's going to beat you, we're going to get the ball to Harvin. And by the way, Harvin's going to play with a bad rib, but he's still going to play. This guy, he's never going to be healthy again, and the weird thing is, it almost doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. The Vikings secondary took a step forward last week. We'll see if that carries over. The offensive line took a bigger leap than a lot of people are giving them credit for, particularly a guy like Phil Lodehold at right tackle, who's really struggled. He's really seeming to make some strides. There's going to be a story about that in just a little bit at 1500ESPN.com. He's Judd. I'm Tom. I'm heading down to Chicago. I'll be at Soldier Field on Sunday night. We'll see you there.